Good morning. Good morning. I hope that you can see my channel, see my page. I want to say good morning. It is Wednesday, November the 20th, and we are on our week 5 of Self Care at Work Challenge. Did you know that self care can actually boost your productivity? When you feel good, you work better. Take that break. You've earned it. Excellent. And that is what self care is about. That video, take your break at work. Take your breaks at work. It is so very important. So I want to get started. I want to get right into our self-care at work challenge. Last week, I talked about barriers. I talked about setting barriers and setting boundaries at work. That is what I talked about. And it is so important on setting boundaries as it relates to our self-care that it was worth repeating again this week. So this week we're going to talk about boundaries one more time because I want to make sure that it is clear on how important, how extremely important setting boundaries at work is as it relates to your self-care at work. And some people may say, well, I'm not in a supervisor position or I'm not in a leadership position, so it's hard to set boundaries. Regardless of your position at work, it is important to setting boundaries. It is essential to your mental health. You know, why do you set boundaries? Okay, you may be saying, Belinda, why does it matter? Why does setting boundaries matter? Because they form it sets up the stage. It's a form of self-respect, and it protects you from being overextended. It protects you from being burnt out and unnecessary stress. That's the importance of boundaries. That's the importance of setting up boundaries in your life and at work. You know, now more than ever, and I think I've probably said it every week so far, and I'm repeating it again today. Now more than ever, work has been at an all-time high of stressfulness, an all-time high. And as someone who's in human resources, I talk to employees all the time who are just burnt out. You know, they want to be there, they enjoy the work, but they are just burnt out to the core. I too, at a time, was burnt out just to the core, to the point where you just be like, I hate it here, when you really didn't, but you were just so burnt out. And that is why setting self-care at work is important. And in that is setting boundaries because it helps you from being overextended. It helps to keep burnout and it helps with unnecessary stress. And last week and this week, again, I'm going to talk about how to set it up. One, there are time boundaries. And this is when you can set a specific start and end time for your workday. And you want to stick to it as much as possible. A lot of people who are salary workers don't always work the straight 8 hours. Sometimes they work 9 hours. Sometimes they work 10 hours, just straight through. When you work from home, a lot of times it's easy to just keep going because you're at home. So it's like, well, I can normally I'd be commuting, I'll just keep working. No, set specific start time and end time for your workday and stick to it as much as possible. Now, are there going to be times where you can't always get off at 5 o'clock? Absolutely. But for the most part, you want to get off, start the time you're supposed to start, and end the time that you're supposed to start. Another example of time boundaries would be not checking emails all day long. Resist that. Have a do not disturb work period. Because when you are trying to focus on your work, it's called when you focus on your deep work. And that is when you're in tune, you're focused, you're getting stuff done, you can feel the flow of it coming, you're in a groove. Then somebody calls, the phone rings or text, somebody comes into your office, and it disrupts that. and your deep work gets broken up and you're not as effective, and it takes longer to complete a task that you might have been able to finish in 30 minutes. So for time boundaries at work, you may say between this time and this time, I'm not checking any emails. Between this time and this time, I'm going to have a do not disturb because I really need to focus on this project or this presentation without being interrupted. We all should have time at work where we do deep work to get our work, the work that we need to move forward to get it done, where we're just focused on that to get it done. So time boundaries. There's workload boundaries. Know your limits. You know, a lot of us feel like we can take on the world, and we probably can. But at work, sometimes our plate is full. And it's okay to say no, or not yet, or I can do it next week, because maybe right now your plate overflows, right? But next week you have some free time because all the deadlines and stuff are gone. So sometimes instead of taking on one more thing, you can, if it's possible, say, can I do this? Can I push this to a further date? Or I can take on this, but I got to get rid of this, this, and this. So to know your work boundaries, and not just we can take on things. I mean, I can take on a whole lot of things. Now, will it be quality? When you get it, will it be any good, or will it be trash? I don't want to give out trash work. You don't want to give out trash work. You want to give out quality work. So you want to make sure that you know your boundaries. Now, on the flip side, that doesn't mean that I'm only going to do very little at work at a time. You don't want to do that when you know you could do more. So there's a balance in that. So you want to make sure that you know yourself if your plate's full. And maybe it's full because you don't know how to do technology. Maybe you don't know how to work a Mac computer. And so how it takes somebody 5 minutes, it may take you an hour because you don't have no idea how to work a Mac computer. So if that's the case, then you want to try to fill in the gaps on that, because then it's not workload. It's your skill level on the device that you're using. So be mindful of those things too. The other thing is communication boundaries. When I do orientation, one of the things that I tell everybody is how to communicate with me. Always tell them, first, the best way to communicate with me is email. The second one is text or group me. And the third one is a phone call, because I'm in a lot of meetings and it's easier for me to respond to an email or a text than to take every call. And what I tell people is, if you have to talk to me, because sometimes you do, it's important. You can say in the email, you can say in the text, hey, when you get a minute or when you get time, can you call me? I need to discuss something with you. That's my version of communicating my boundaries when new people are coming in, or people in general, when people are coming in. The best way to reach me, email always, then text and or group me if you're in a group me, and then phone call, because like I said, I'm in meetings a lot. So it is hard to just take these random phone calls. So communicate that. Communicate how you prefer to communicate. So establish preferred communication channels and response times with your team. So for example, if an issue isn't urgent, because sometimes, especially like in an email, now that people are, emailing, having focus on emailing or text, those don't be an emergency. It's not a stop what you're doing, Belinda, and get right on it. I'm going to respond, but if it's not an emergency, I'm not going to respond right that second. If it's an emergency, I will respond right that second because it's an emergency. But if it's not an emergency or urgent, I will respond before the work hours are over with. And I communicate that with all the people that I work with. Because I want you to remember that you're not responsible for others' feelings and reactions to your boundaries. If you set a respectful boundary and someone responds negatively, that's a reflection of them, not you. So when you set up your boundaries to say, hey, this is my designated work time, I plan to get off at this time, that's a healthy boundary. If you set up a time to say, this is my workload, I can get to that, but I won't be able to get to it till next week, or I can get to it, but I'll have to take off this. If you're communicating that respectfully and people get upset, that's a reflection of them. If you're saying, hey, this is the best way, this is my preferred communication channel, that this is how I prefer to communicate, to get communications with you, that I will answer your messages. If it's not urgent or if it's not an emergency, I will respond before the end of the day, maybe not right that second when you send the text or when you send the email. Those are boundaries. I set them up respectfully. It's not a reflection of anybody else. I'm not trying to make work harder for somebody else. I'm trying to make work more effective for me so that I can show up to my best self, as my best self at work. You want to practice assertiveness and remind yourself that self-care and boundaries don't mean selfishness. They're necessary to avoid burnout and, again, to be your best self. Some practical tips: start small. I said this last week. Again, I'm repeating it again. Start small. Don't go in, if you've never set boundaries before, with a laundry list of these are the things that you're now going to put a line in the sand. Start small. Maybe 1 or 2 boundaries at a time. Maybe start with a strict start and end time. Or maybe you start with between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. I'm doing no meetings because I'm focusing on my deep work. Start small. Which is why I wanted to repeat setting up boundaries, because we struggle as a whole of setting up boundaries for ourselves and communicating those boundaries. The second is communicate openly. That's the other thing too. If nobody knows what your boundaries are, then it's hard for other people to respect them. If I know you're not doing meetings between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m., then I'm not going to go trying to set up a meeting for us at 10:15, because you have no meetings between 10 and 11, and I can respect that. But if I don't know that that's your boundary, then that's what here lies the problem. So you want to communicate them openly, clear and respectful. You don't have to go in demanding and I this and I. Communicate clearly. Everybody wants people to show up as their best self. Communicate that clearly. Let your team know, your manager know about the boundaries and how it may affect them. Like I plan to do no meetings between 10 and 11 because that's when I'm most productive and I can get these projects done. Your colleagues and your supervisors will understand that if it's communicated well. Hold yourself accountable. Boundaries are only effective if we stick to them consistently. One day you may say, I'm doing no meetings between 10 and 11, right? I communicated that. I'm standing on that. No meetings between 10 and 11. And then a week from now, lo and behold, you've scheduled meetings between 10 and 11. 1, it sends mixed messages. And 2, you're not holding up your end on the boundaries that you set. So you want to make sure that you are holding yourself accountable, that, again, that you're consistent with your boundaries. Be mindful when you're tempted to ignore your boundaries, and remind yourself of why they're essential for your well-being. Setting boundaries can sometimes feel awkward and difficult, I know, but it's ultimately empowering. They allow you to manage your energy, to be intentional about your work, and show up as your best self. Embracing boundaries is one of the best forms of self-care you can practice at work, giving you more control over your time, focus, and most importantly, your well-being. We're going to go back to, or we're going to repeat again, our boundaries our self-cares that we're doing this week. It is our morning routine. Our morning routine consists of 5 minutes before you start work, drink some water, hydrate. You want to write down 3 things you're grateful for about your job. Think of 3 things. Everybody has 3 things that they are grateful for about their job, that they can be grateful for about their job. The third thing is to say a prayer or meditation right before you start work. So again, 5 minutes before you clock in, drink some water, write down 3 things that you are grateful for at work, and say a prayer affirmation. Then at lunch, we're going to take a full lunch break with no work. A lot of times we work through lunch, we eat and do lunch at the same time. We're not going to do that. I encourage people, maybe get up from your desk, from your work site, and have your lunch somewhere else. But sometimes that's not always possible. But if you do have to sit at your workstation, Don't do any work. Read a book. Sit in silence and just eat and let your food digest. Don't feel like you have to do something. But for our lunch, there's no work. So morning routines are breakfast, or when we start, lunch, no work. And then an hour before we get off work, we're going to take a pause. And you're going to look and say, okay, what can I do? What task can I do that when I finish, it ends the note on a high note? Is it clear all my emails and be like, okay, whew, done. I end on a high note. Finish that task that I'm working on. Let me focus and buckle down and get this task finished, right? And that way, when I finish that, my time's up and I've had a good day. Maybe it's, let me finish these phone calls. Oh, I was supposed to call these people, but let me get that because I don't want it to drag on. Whatever it is, an hour before you're supposed to get off work, because an hour before you're supposed to get off work, pause, think about what is that one thing I can do where I can end on a high note. Do that thing. And then boundaries. That can be done anytime. And that's why I'm bringing it back again, because I want you to really embrace that this time. Boundaries. Set up at least one boundary at work this week. Whether it's strict start and stop time. Whether it is, I'm going to communicate how I prefer to communicate. Like I told you when I said, or for new hires, email, text, or group me, then phone call. I communicate that. Maybe I set the boundary of no meetings between this time and this time. I want you to pick one boundary that you're going to set up at work and start that boundary. Start doing that. Start incorporating that. Those are the 4 things that we're doing this week. It is not too late to sign up for the self-care work challenge. It ends at the end of the year. And hey, knowing me, I may take that even into 2025. But for right now, it takes 67 days for a habit to become ingrained in you. 67 days. That's why we started 5 weeks ago, to get it down so we can end our year on a high note and start the new year on a high note, already practicing and embracing self-care. We're going out with a bang with self-care. We're going in 2025 with self-care. So I want to thank you all for watching.
I am blessed. I am blessed. Every day of my life I am blessed. When I wake up in the morning and I lay my head to rest, every day of my life I am blessed. Me say me praise God straight, make money, money haters, fun bad mind. God knows me love woman, me father him, that's why me born. And enough of them a try stop me fly past them straight. One heap of them a wicked, so what them in a rate. You know them want back the little food from me plate, but I got over devil a hell fit them straight. I am blessed. I am blessed every day.